channel partnership program at AppCheck, which specifically my higher overview, my role really entails supporting our key partners in various markets, such as ComSec, who I'm here supporting today. I'm glad and grateful to be here as well. And ultimately, what we're trying to achieve is to help organizations to be more proactive in finding and securing their web applications and infrastructure through automated vulnerability scanning, simply put. So I'm really excited to get into my topic today, the role of automation in an evolving threat landscape. So what will I be covering specifically? Briefly, a quick introduction to who AppCheck are. I know there's one or two here today that are already using the service, so bear with me there, but there's also a few that I'm sure that I've not come across before. I'm then going to delve into the topic at hand, the evolving threat landscape across three specific areas. Within my conversation, really, there's a lot I can talk about, but we really have to focus on some areas that are key to where we specialise, really. The role automation can play through vulnerability scanning to help organisations with that. And finally, a recap and a small gift at the end as well for everybody, so bear with me on that one. So, who are we? AppCheck is as I mentioned, a web application and infrastructure vulnerability scanning platform. It's been designed to help and look for security flaws in web applications and infrastructure technology stacks. The tool itself has been around for about 15 years now, and originally it was designed to help, or we used to have a manual penetration testing service, no longer the case. And the reason we designed it was there was a lot of great tools in the market that were very infrastructure focused, which is awesome, but they didn't lend their hand as well to web applications and the dark art and the complexities within web applications. So the decision was made that our team would design and develop their own tool in order to improve the automation and the testing capabilities around these complexities with applications. And really it just took on a whole new game on its own, really, where it became a standalone tool. More and more organisations started to realise that, well, we're getting our pen test every year, which is great, and then we continue to do so, it's very important. But over the next 12 months, or biannually, depending on how often you get a pen test, there was real concerns about the vulnerability landscape within those applications, in between those, because people were adding new features, new functionality, changes to infrastructure, so on and so forth, and therefore they wanted to have more automation to help find more vulnerabilities and help them be proactive in discovering those and remediating. So we made the decision to spin AppCheck out as a standalone business in 2014, and we've just been growing rapidly since then. I've got the Check Scan Plus logo on there as well. We are the underlying technology as part of the actual scanning service. I certainly can't do the justice of the great people at ComSec and the services team that they have the service they provide around the technology itself. I'll leave that to Gary, who's going to be following up for me in a minute or two, who can go into that in more detail himself. But it's worth mentioning that obviously it's the technology behind the actual service. Just a little bit of credibility, I suppose, with some organisations and industry we work in. There's no real set industry we typically work with. It's various organisations of all shapes and sizes, charities, SMEs, public sector, large enterprise. You kind of get the idea, just to give you a bit of an idea. So let's get stuck into the topic, really. The evolving threat landscape and the role automation can play. I'm going to talk about three specific areas. One, COVID-19. It's the big thing that we've all been thinking about, talking about, worrying about over the last 18 months. And this is the same within the security role as well, and more specifically web applications and infrastructure. New threats and zero-day vulnerabilities, which I'll go into a little bit more detail. And we've recently had some changes within the OWASP Top 10. If you're not familiar with the OWASP Top 10, I'll go into that. But some big changes about 1 month ago, so it's worth mentioning that with the ever-evolving threat landscape, keeping with the theme today. So, COVID-19, in late 2019, early 2020, it's safe to say that how businesses would operate for the foreseeable future will have changed drastically, and thus a whole host of new security challenges to come with it, not an easy task. The pandemic itself has triggered business survival instincts which have accelerated digital transformation like never seen before. All of a sudden, and I know this because a lot of my customers, we're trying to give you examples of what was going on their end, have all of a sudden spun up infrastructure. There's infrastructure everywhere in the cloud. Things have been opened up to allow people to continue to work from home. We've got new web applications, new websites, new features that are being added to keep service users or keep revenue as high as it was or as best as possible pre-pandemic levels. So a lot of changes to keep the lights on and keep the wheels turning for these businesses. And ultimately, has security been an afterthought? And I would argue that there's a case to say potentially, and I don't blame anybody for that, because at the end of the day, if there was no business there to secure in the first place, then we figured out security anyway. So keeping things going was first and foremost the most important thing. We've seen a huge rise in cyber attacks. I think we're all talking about this in different topics for sure, but in the last year alone in various industries, specifically web application attacks have doubled in 2020, and within healthcare and charities. And that's quite a scary statistic, I would say, given the fact that these are really important services to the community. And I think it's more evident, albeit it wasn't a web application attack here in the Republic of Ireland. We've seen the HSE one, which is obviously getting a lot of media attention. Also, at AppCheck, now this wasn't a full-blown study, it was just a very light analysis of some data across the scans we run. So we run tens and tens and tens of thousands of scans every month. And prior to when everybody started working from home, one of the analysts just had a quick look at and seen the changes in the amount of high-impact vulnerabilities across all scans, ultimately. And we've seen quite a significant spike in those vulnerabilities, and just an educated guess, like I say, we didn't drill into the data in too much extreme detail. I think it was safe to say that a lot of the changes that have happened with working from home, new features being added, as I mentioned, new applications, have probably contributed to that increase in vulnerabilities, certainly over the first few months. So, what role does automated vulnerability scanning play within this arena? Many organizations, as we just talked about, many organizations have made a lot of fundamental changes to the key infrastructure and applications. And a real good example, one of my clients who, when the lockdown first started, they decided that they wanted to improve the customer experience online, the customer journey and so on. And to improve that experience, they decided that they would integrate a third-party customer experience chat box. You know, those ones that pop up and say, hey, how can I help you? And try and find out what you want and what you need. So they integrated that into their application, the core application. Looked great, the feature was unbelievable, they were happy. We started running the AppCheck scans in the background, obviously, once the changes have been made. And it turns out that there was a huge vulnerability that was introduced following the change, which allowed us to do a SQL injection attack, ultimately. So that was a real live example of somebody integrating something over COVID to try and improve customer experience with the new changes, and ultimately doing things to better the company had actually introduced a vulnerability that could have really derailed all the good work that they'd done previously. These two topics I'm going to talk about together because they're quite similar in a sense, but we've seen a huge rise in online trading platforms, so organizations who are trying to keep pre-pandemic revenue levels at speed as they would have done post-pandemic. And for a lot of organizations where it's more retail-based, a lot of them really have to adapt to online trading, and we've seen a huge boom in that. I mean, I don't know anybody here who's not been ordering off Amazon at a bare minimum, if not other places online. And as a result, there was a real rush to develop and push these applications into the wild. And again, in some cases, not all, I think security has been seen to be a little bit of an afterthought. We are seeing organizations, after they've developed the site and it's gone live, then the site, we'll check on the security, but it's already been out there for 6 months, and we're finding significant vulnerabilities, and they may not necessarily have things in place that can tell them if they've already been breached, and we're finding vulnerabilities on a consistent basis. Another good example, we've had a huge rise in cloud-based platforms. So most notably myself, now my GP, and it's a great service. Everything's online now. I go onto an online platform, I speak to the doctor online, I get my prescription online, and it's all very, very nice and easy. And that's really improved, but again, as an afterthought, I do think about these things when I'm talking to these doctors, and it sort of pops into my head thinking, I wonder what they've done with this platform. Has it been secured in the right way? Has this been rushed out to try and help with the pandemic? But ultimately, All of these changes and factors have created a perfect environment for bad actors to take advantage. The role of automating scanning, every time you make a change, add a new feature, change your infrastructure, open something up, having something there that can allow you to look, verify, check, and then remediate that vulnerability if it exists can be so powerful and give you so much more eyes on that. So, moving on to new threats and zero-day vulnerabilities. For those of you who are not too familiar with zero-day vulnerabilities, ultimately they're just a vulnerability that's been discovered in the wild in applications or infrastructure that are already in production, typically within larger vendors in most cases. So ones that have never been discovered before, and they can be discovered by a bad actor and they're using it maliciously, or it could be some of the good guys who find this through research and obviously do safe disclosure to try and educate everybody about this and get a patch out. The latest Verizon Data Breach Report has highlighted that from 2014 to 2021 we've seen a drastic shift in the current threat landscape, which is why I kind of wanted to put that statement in there. It just shows that this is constantly ever evolving and nothing is staying still when it comes to security and other various elements of the IT spectrum. We've had more high impact vulnerabilities, CV disclosures in 2020 than any other year previously. 50 CVEs per day, and not all of these will be relevant to your tech stack, but that is just a phenomenal amount of vulnerabilities. How do you stay on top of that every single day? And I'll touch on that in a moment. Ultimately, some form of automation, because we're only human and there's only so many things we can do, having that there as a safeguard at the bare minimum to find and remediate vulnerabilities can be really, really important. And we've already had more zero-day vulnerabilities this year, with 2 months still to go, than any other previous year. You can see on the graph there's been peaks and troughs over the years. We've had a significant spike this year. Reading into this particular study, it looks as though that trend is just going to continue up and up. And there's good reasons as well as bad reasons. It isn't all negative. The obvious one is there's a lot more bad actors out there exploiting these zero-day vulnerabilities and using it maliciously. But there's also a lot of good guys out there doing research, finding these vulnerabilities, disclosing them safely to the vendor, and working on a patch to let the community know. People like ComSec and people like the guys at AppCheck who are working on this type of stuff on a continuous basis. So, what role does vulnerability scanning and how can it help within this element? As I talked about, we've got CVEs coming out every single day, and it's an unenviable task to stay on top of that. So regular scanning in place can allow you to make sure that nothing's been missed and remediate in a timely fashion. Alongside signature-based detections, which is ultimately banner checks to look for these known vulnerabilities, these known CVEs, the actual AppCheck/CheckScan+ service detects these vulnerabilities using first principle testing methodologies. So we apply more of a human element to how we discover and rationalize the vulnerability, albeit it's automation. And this allows us to really crawl, build up a narrative of what the applications do, properly fuzz the attack surface, and then exploit the vulnerability by using a bit of a benign, safe script to confirm and validate it. It makes the product a lot more accurate, less false positive prone, and able to provide you more details to replicate the vulnerability. Which kind of moves on nicely to the zero-day research we do at AppCheck. We recently have, when we find a vulnerability, and it's maybe an edge case, we've got a research team there that will then go off and explore. And a really good live example was in early July, one of our customers who runs an Umbraco CMS platform, for those who may or may not be familiar with that. We found the vulnerability. It looked like an interesting one, got flagged to the research team. The research team then went off and reviewed the vulnerability, did analysis on it, and it turned out that this was a worldwide issue with all Umbraco sites, that this could be breached for everybody. So it was a remote code execution vulnerability, which you can see in the bottom left here. What we then did was work with Umbraco directly to get a patch out there, safe disclosure with those guys. We worked on that patch, and we then worked on getting our platform updated on the same day so that we can detect for that for all customers using Umbraco easily. And then we obviously got accredited with that for Umbraco, and the wider world of community got made aware. So that's the kind of stuff that we're doing from that perspective. But the beauty of that is, from an automation perspective, you've got something there that's continuously looking for these threats and 0 days, and the research that you don't necessarily have in your side of the fence, or people are doing that in the background. You wouldn't even know this happening half the time, which is great. So we've had some changes to the OWASP Top 10. For those of you who are not too familiar with OWASP, it's an organisation that provides unbiased information on an device, computer and internet web application security. They typically publish a list of 10 vulnerabilities most commonly exploited over a set period of time, and usually quite impactful, and a lot of them in some cases are quite basic web application attacks. So we've had a change, and literally about 6 weeks ago we've had a new list come out, and it's a little bit like out of the old and in with the new. It kind of goes with the theme of the game, with the ever-evolving threat landscape. We've seen old favourites like injection attacks actually move down the list. I think they were number one for years. And we've had some newcomers, and one vulnerability we're seeing more often from a scan perspective is the server-side request forgery. So that's a new vulnerability that we're seeing more often now as well. And it kind of ties in with what the guys at OWASP are seeing. So it just is evident that nothing is standing still again, and constantly evolving threats. And it's very difficult to stay on top of it just with human knowledge only. Having some form of automation can be key. Moreover on that, applications are becoming more complex. They've got a lot of different attack tiers in there. There's a lot of areas in which you can input data, and attack surface is just really appealing to cyber criminals. And with that, the reason I really wanted to delve into the OWASP Top 10 is that regular scanning and the role it can play here can be hugely fundamental. The ability to, at least at a bare minimum on your web applications, to look for and discover vulnerabilities within the OWASP Top 10 can really give you the bare minimum, good baseline really to really protect your organisation from a web app perspective. Albeit we do a hell of a lot more, and ultimately, should you and could you do more? Yes, but at a bare minimum, OWASP Top 10 is a great place to start when we're discussing web applications. Augmenting a scanning service alongside your annual penetration test typically gives you the best coverage. So you may get a pen test once a year, twice a year, whatever it may be, and fantastic. In between those pen tests, at a bare minimum, we would usually recommend that on a web application, you're looking for the OWASP Top 10 at a minimum, even though this would do a lot more, so that you're at least getting that basic attack. Silly things that get forgotten about. There's a change in code, and before you know it, somebody's forgot to do something. It's not been done the way that you were expected, and there's SQL injection, or there's cross-site scripting, or something interesting that's exploitable. And finally, this could really have a topic on its own, but we've seen a huge shift within the DevOps to DevSecOps within organizations who do their own internal development and improving the SDLC environment that they work within. We're seeing more automated testing within CI/CD pipelines into those processes, so integrations that we would do typically, we've got a lot of organizations that integrate into things like Azure DevOps, TeamCity, for example. And ultimately, again, to bring it back to the OWASP Top 10, how automation and scanning can help here, is at a bare minimum, you're developing applications from the ground up. If you have something in place to automate and test these applications from the beginning of development, rather than waiting until it's already in production, gives you a better chance to have a more secure and more robust web application from day one. So when you're deploying these into a live environment, then you've got some comfortable feeling that at least the OWASP Top 10 is covered before then you might get your manual penetration testing to do a deeper dive following that. So how can AppCheck and ComSec help with the evolving threat landscape through automation? First of all, it's cloud-based, so very simple. With the working from home environment now, people maybe change a lot of things late at evening. I hear a lot of clients say that they're doing a big update tonight, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, quite normal. If you have those types of concerns, because if it is a big update, you can quickly log in anywhere in the world and run a scan against that application or the infrastructure and verify that you've not introduced anything that you weren't happy with. There's also elements to do internal testing, so it's not all necessarily cloud-based, shall we say. It doesn't require hardware, but you can deploy a virtual machine, a VM, deploy it onto your internal network, and this will allow you to test your internal assets as well, applications and infrastructure. I think the recurring theme that I really hopefully I got across, and I typically like to talk about, the beauty of the automation piece, it's the reoccurrence, it's the regularity of finding vulnerabilities on a continuous basis. I can't state how much more important that is than any of all the rest of these elements. It's having something that's constantly looking for you, giving you that proactive approach and allowing you to detect, remediate, just gives you the better coverage overall. Quality testing and the technical highlights, so that the actual output, the actual reporting itself, really in depth, the analysis, the remediation. I'm not going to dwell on that in too much detail, but it goes to, it's very, very detailed from a scanner perspective, especially on the web application when we're talking about the kind of payloads we're injecting and so on, so you can really understand and work out how we've achieved those vulnerabilities to educate your teams, for example, with the remediation. And finally, I did say earlier, I'm not going to steal Gary's thunder because it's come up now in a minute, no pressure, Gary. But from a scanning perspective, the Comsec guys have built a fantastic service around the actual platform. They have their own expertise, and I can't do it justice myself with the additional things that David, Joe, John, and so on have created in the EM team. So really, I'll leave that to Gary in a moment. And finally, I did say that there will be a bit of a free gift for everybody. Apologies if anybody here has already got AppCheck, maybe one or two here, but for anybody who's not, we'll be happy to offer a free vulnerability assessment. Literally, what we would do is just take one or two of your applications, some of your external IPs, run it through the scanner, give you a bit of an idea of what kind of threats you may have currently on the applications or infrastructure, a bit of a run through, a bit of advice off the back of a full report, and away you go. It gives you an idea of what the capabilities are and what the service looks like from Comsec, from a Check Scan Plus perspective. So, in summary, it's evident that an ever-evolving approach is best, with automation playing a key part to help. I think we would all agree that some form of automation is vital. The last 18 months alone has shown us how quick things are evolving. We've had COVID-19, the whole world's changed for a start, never mind just technology and security. We've had the constant new 0 days, new threats being released on a daily basis, and we have changes to the OWASP top 10. And these are 3 areas that I would implore people to at least look into and think about with your organisations. Have you made some of these changes I've discussed, or we've discussed today? And is there a potential gap there for potential vulnerabilities? Where possible, look at a proactive approach, if possible, and look to see if there's some form of automation that can help you, whether through things like AppCheck, Check Scan Plus, or some other means. But having some form of automation can certainly help improve. Talk with the security guys at Comsec. They're a brilliant team, as I mentioned. They'll be more than happy to conduct a demo of the actual platform as well, and give you a bit more insight on how it works, which I'm not doing today, obviously. And finally, take a free assessment. It's easy to do, so if you want to have a go, no problem at all. Go. Any questions?
Thanks very much, Samir. That was really interesting. A lot of good stuff there, and I see a lot of good work that AppCheck are doing for a company of its size. I was asking Samir this morning, like, what size is AppCheck? And he said 50 employees, and he was number 9. How long are you with? 6 years now?
6 years, yeah.
Yeah, which was really amazing. And I saw on your LinkedIn channel yesterday you have a new announcement.
Yeah.
Do you want to give us?
I forgot to mention it, to be fair. I was going to say it.
I thought you would.
Yeah. As a result of some of the research that we've been doing, actually, the research team, I mean, they are unbelievably good. They're really, really clever guys. And because we've been releasing or finding 0 days quite a lot recently, and the research team's grown a little bit as well. We were finding vulnerabilities, and it was taking like 3, 4, 5 months for us to be A, allocated the CVE, and B, to work and help people to get patches out. So we didn't think that was good for the community, really. So we approached the miner in this database, the people that handle the CVE, basically, organisations, so that we could become initially an offer, and we're I think there's only 5 companies in the UK where tier 1 CVE authority now, is I think what it is. I'm just learning about it myself too, so bear with me on that, but the technology guys deserve a lot of kudos for that. But I think it really shows the sort of cutting edge stuff that we're working on, really around the web applications. We do great stuff in the infrastructure, but web applications, we're literally trying to be at the forefront of new technologies, and this type of research they're doing is keeping us and our clients and our partners one step ahead of the game in that sense.